welcome to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome. Come in and have a seat. There's one right beside me here, okay? Well, my name is Chioma and this is my channel where I basically document my experience of living in Australia as an immigrant from Nigeria, okay? And today's video in particular is a special one because it came requested. Yes, one of you wanted to know what life is like as a social worker here in Australia, and wanted me to talk about my experience of practicing as a social worker, and that's what I'm going to be doing in this video. So I am hoping that if you are someone who is maybe considering a career change into the social work profession, maybe you would find a few helpful tips and information to help you in your decision making around whether it's a good fit for you. Okay, so you are in the right place. Well, before I go ahead, I want to thank you all who have subscribed to this channel. All of you who continue to like my videos, I just want to say thank you, and also ask that you please consider liking, sharing, subscribing if this is the first time you've joined, or maybe you're a returning viewer and you find the content that I share on here useful in any way. It would really help me if you are able to do that for me. So I thought I would start by actually talking about what social work is, because coming from Nigeria myself, I know that social work is not a highly developed profession in Nigeria. As a matter of fact, I don't think I met even one social worker or someone who identified as a social worker while I lived there. So maybe you're wondering what social work is. You've heard the term social work before, but you don't particularly know what social workers do. So here in Australia, social work is considered an allied health practice. And it just means that we as social workers are focused on providing support to people in need, people in crisis, or people at risk of harm, people in vulnerable situations, okay? Now, the practice is underpinned by the principles of social justice and also human rights. And social workers are trained in human behavior, family and social systems. And a huge part of our work, as a matter of fact, I would consider the core of our work to be around tackling social issues. There's a whole range of social issues that you can think about in that sense. So things like, domestic and family violence, drugs and alcohol, gambling, homelessness, mental health. We're everywhere, okay? So that's just a little snapshot of what social work is about. And having said that, maybe I should give you a quick run through of what my day-to-day looks like. I work in a university. So in my role in the university, we provide case management to students who have experienced domestic or family violence or trauma from sexual violence as well. And like I said, we provide that on a case management basis. So that's like the core of what we do. But as well, we also provide training and health promotion campaigns within the university community, and that could take the form of different trainings that we deliver to both staff and students. So a day-to-day for me at the moment, because we are in a lockdown and things are a little different from when we obviously had to go into the office, so everything is being transacted remotely right now. So at the moment, my day starts when I wake up, obviously, and then I might do a bit of a workout before I log into work. I am thankful for that. I mean, the 2-hour commute or almost 2-hour commute is no longer a thing while we are in the lockdown, which is something that I appreciate. Yeah, so I log into work, check my emails, I check my calendar to see what tasks I have lined up for the day. And a typical day for me would usually involve meeting with some of the students on my caseload. And those meetings at the moment obviously would happen over the phone or by Zoom. And then there will also be meetings with my team members as well, just to keep abreast of what we're doing and to also support each other while we are supporting students and staff. We also do a lot of trainings for the purpose of professional development. And we also attend a lot of information sessions or workshops just to stay on top of the latest legislation or policies that affect or impact on what we do. So for instance, because I work in the domestic and family violence space, We are constantly learning about the new procedures or methods or policies that are coming into place that impact on clients who come through in that space seeking support. So things like court processes, how to handle police reports, hospital provisions for victims of sexual assault. So that might include things like forensic testing and all of those sorts of things. So we have to keep abreast of that. And also the wider legislation in the states around domestic violence and domestic violence provisions for both offenders and victims. So we have to stay abreast of all of that. So did I mention that we also deliver workshops? As a matter of fact, this week happens to be the first week of the new semester. This is semester 2. At the start of every semester, we deliver workshops around consent education to new students. We target that training to new students and also student leaders in some of the colleges affiliated to the university that I work at. We also get involved in developing programs around prevention and response as well. These programs can be delivered to both staff and students and other members of the university community. Then obviously I have to make out some time in there to get on top of my record keeping, because we generate a lot of records, whether it is records related to direct contact with clients or liaison on behalf of clients. We have to keep records of all those transactions, okay? I guess in every organization, they would usually have a software where they can store clients' information securely, okay? So if a student comes to me, for instance, because they have experienced domestic violence, I would usually do like a risk assessment with them and find out what's happening in terms of safety, if they would be needing support to maybe move out of where they are staying because they are still exposed to the risk. So I might be helping them to arrange emergency accommodation or more long-term accommodation. I need to find out if anyone else in their domestic situation is impacted as well. For instance, if children are involved, then there might be need to make a mandatory report. And yes, I know that there's a lot of sensitivity around mandatory reporting when it comes to child protection issues, but I'm just going to quickly say this, that mandatory reporting is primarily not for the purpose of removing children from their homes. It's more like a first step towards arranging support for whatever protective elements that exist within that child's life, and to sort of bolster those protective elements to continue to keep the child safe. Yes, but I'm just saying that it might become part of my responsibility as well. And then if obviously the matter is escalated to the police, I might be supporting the students to access the police, provide some emotional support when they go to make their police report. I might refer them to other services like court advocacy services if the matter proceeds to court. So there's a lot of liaison, collaboration that happens within that space. But yeah, that's basically what I do. So if a student comes through as a critical incident, so it would usually be around things like a student who has been reported missing by their faculty on the back of that student not having logged into their class systems or their class portals. And so because there's not been any registered activity from the student in a while, they might be reported missing, potentially missing, even though most of the students, if not all of them, who come through to us in that manner of referral are usually found, okay? Or a critical incident could be a student who ends up in hospital as a result of a mental health episode. And so in that regard, we would have to follow up with the hospital and just make sure that the student is well supported. It could also be, unfortunately, in some instances, things concerning suicide, whether it's a successful suicide or an attempted suicide. So it would usually also come to us. So we help students in that space to navigate all these different aspects of arranging supports for their well-being. And obviously that would also include liaising with faculty to make sure that the student is well supported in the period that they are dealing with that trauma, so they are not falling behind on their studies, or that they're getting extra support to manage their studies as well. So that's it for a snapshot of what I do. Now, moving on to qualifications. So what do you need in terms of qualifications to be able to practice as a social worker? Here in Australia, the minimum requirement is for you to have a bachelor degree. So for me, I came into social work practice through a master degree. So it's called the master's qualifying, and that is the pathway for people who come from non-social work related backgrounds but who want to make the switch into social work. Then you could go through the master's qualifying if you already have a bachelor degree in another field, again, that is unrelated to social work. So you just have to make sure that whatever course you study, it is accredited by the regulatory authority for social workers here in Australia. It is called the Australian Association of Social Workers, or AASW. So they are in charge of regulating the profession in terms of providing standardization around training and practice. Now, talking about the fields of practice in social work, it is very diverse, okay? And that's one thing that I appreciate about social work, the fact that if you got tired of being in a particular field and maybe you want to move into something else, it's very possible with social work. So now, for instance, I am in domestic family violence and sexual assault, but maybe tomorrow or in years to come, I might decide that, I want something a bit more project focused, okay? And so I might go into community development and be a project officer there. Or maybe I might decide that I want to be more involved in policy development. It's also possible as a social worker. So I could work in a government agency, or I could move into research. So important skills to develop as a social worker. This is what I consider to be skills that are highly relevant to working effectively as a social worker. The first would be good communication skills. Actually, great communication skills. You need that. Very closely linked to that is active listening skills. That has to be one of the core skills of social work practice, active listening. So listening to understand, clarifying, no judgment, not interrupting, just being in that space with the client and making the client have that sense that you're actually in that space with them. You're not distracted, you're not thinking of something else, and you're not asking questions that appear to be judging the client or their situation, but you are asking questions to clarify, to understand, and to empathize. And that brings me to the next skill, which is empathy, all right? That is a core skill of social work practice. You need to have great empathy for people. So another skill would be time management, especially if you find yourself in an area like myself where you're doing case management. You would probably have a caseload of clients. So you need to be able to prioritize what you're doing and be able to do it in a timely manner for each of the clients that you are supporting, okay? And you need some creativity to be able to do that. So yeah, creativity is another thing. And another aspect of creativity, I guess, is tied to the fact that you will be working with systems. Expect to hit the road of bureaucracy in your social work practice, okay? Because you're working within systems. You have the immediate system of the organization that you work in. They would have their own policies and regulations that you need to keep to. And then there's the wider influence of external policies or legislation as well. And within all of these systems, you need to be working in a client-centered manner, okay? And that can be difficult sometimes to manage the client's needs on one hand and the boundaries that you need to keep to as dictated by the policies where you work, okay? You need some creativity to be able to sort of navigate that space. It can be tricky sometimes, but yeah, you need creativity. You also need a lot of self-awareness and have the ability to self-reflect. Very, very important as a social worker, because there's a few things at play here. As a social worker, you need to recognize that in the therapeutic relationship with your client, you've got the power, or you've got more power. And so you need to be aware of that power, aware of your biases, aware of exactly where you are located within that relationship, okay? Because the last thing you want to do is to do more harm to the client who has come to you for support. So you need to have a really good measure of self-awareness to be present in that relationship, but not oppress. Okay, so keep that in mind. And then moving on to some of the expectations of you as a social worker. And I am just talking about general things that I feel, regardless of where you work, these things would apply. Okay, so number one is to stay on top of the best practice guidelines in your particular area of specialization. And these best practice guidelines are usually informed by the evidence base. So when I say evidence base, I mean like the body of knowledge that underpins your practice, developed from years of research. You also need to stay on top of legislation and policy. I think I've already touched a little bit on this earlier. You need to know what resources are available to you as the social worker, both within your agency and also, most importantly, out in the community that you serve. Okay, you need to know what is available, because a lot of what we do as social workers centers around providing information, support, and that support could be practical assistance, but as well referrals. Okay, referral to other support services that might benefit the client. So you need to know what resources are available. Then you also need to be very aware of your professional boundaries and stick to them. Okay, professional boundaries are there to protect you and also protect your clients. Okay, and this is really very important in social work practice, because we're working with humans, and wherever there is human connection, emotions can get involved and muddy things up. You don't want that to happen, because it could put the client at risk and also put yourself at risk. Okay, so you need to be keeping to professional boundaries. So the last thing I want to talk about would be regarding looking after yourself. So as previously mentioned, social work practice can be quite demanding, in the sense that you're working in that space where human emotions are involved, and you're probably meeting clients when they are in a distressed state. They are quite heightened from trauma that they have experienced. They are disclosing this trauma to you, and you run a risk of exposure to that trauma from a secondary perspective. So there's something called secondary trauma. There's also vicarious trauma, or you could suffer from compassion fatigue as well. And all of these things put you at risk of burning out. Social work is one of those professions that unfortunately has a high turnover rate. And these are some of the reasons, okay, behind those really high figures. So look after yourself and be intentional about it. A lot of organizations would usually have some kind of structure to provide debrief, or if there's not an in-house structure to help you debrief or to provide supervision, some of them might actually create room for you to be able to get an external supervisor, so that it's not sitting with you, you're not taking it home and having to deal with it yourself. And another thing that I have seen that helps a lot of people is to actually develop a hobby. Find another passion or another interest that is unrelated to what you do as a social worker, and be intentional about taking advantage of the benefits that come from that hobby or that passion or that interest. Please look after yourself. We don't want you to burn out. And that brings me to the end of this video. I hope that it's been helpful. If you're someone who has maybe been considering becoming a social worker, I hope that this helps you to make your decision, okay? Leave your comments in the comment section. Are you a social worker? Is there something you feel I should have talked about that I didn't talk about? Please leave it in the comment section. And yeah, I would see you again in my next video. Goodbye and be safe.